Thank you very much, Graham. And thank you for inviting us to this conference, which I think has, in the face of seeming hopelessness, an awful lot of hope around. And I think, so thanks very much for developing this project. Yesterday was Valentine's Day. I don't know if any of you had any tension in your relationships for being off carousing at a conference on this particular day. But anyway, I wanted to deliver a short Valentine's message to you. I love coming to Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland. I love your Scottish RCGP, all dancing, all singing, president. I think it's cool. I love the NHS. I hate what your government is doing to it. I love no border. And even though it looks like we might be breaking up, we will always in Ireland still love you. And I think this is particularly important because I do think it is the community we have built up, because we are all GPs sharing the same type of workload and saying the same problems, and I really hope we hold on to that community that crosses the actual channel that separates us. This is my first surgery, which I started in 1997, which is based in inner city Dublin. And I was trained in the 1980s in the hallowed halls of Trinity. And Trinity is based in city centre Dublin, but it is based on the model of an island in city centre Dublin. And in that island, it is a haven of learning, and it has a Trumpian-like wall built around it to separate it from the great unwashed who live outside. I was educated in the building blocks of medical education, physiology, biochemistry, pathology, pharmacology, etc., within those hallowed walls of learning. And in my evenings, I worked at the Vincent de Paul with the great unwashed, out working in youth clubs, etc., right throughout the inner city Dublin. My education, both in Trinity and inside my GP training scheme, didn't prepare me for what it was like to work in a practice of deprivation. I did not know how I had to deal with addiction, the issues of addiction inside the city centre. I didn't know what it was like to deal with aggression. I had spent my first 2 years using Valium 2 to 3 times a week because of the aggression I faced in the practice. I'm glad to say I did learn the skills of managing aggression, and I managed to learn them in a way that meant I held on to all those patients and was still able to be a doctor to them. But it was difficult. I didn't understand how to deal with the health of homeless people. I didn't understand how to deal with the flood of migrants that was entering the city centre at the time, or the travellers in the city centre. How to deal with health and social welfare issues, child protection issues. How to deal with a group of people who had been traumatised since their childhood. To do with terrible health behaviours, people who would come in sick as dogs and wouldn't go to the hospital or manage their health. How to deal with multimorbidity. The funerals of young people. I remember getting called out after just 6 months where I was working to a young man who was dying from hepatitis C and couldn't get a GP to visit him. And as I arrived at the front door, it was opened by this young woman who said, "How are you, Austin?" It was one of the children I'd worked with in the inner city back in the 1980s. I'd worked with a group of 15 young people inside in Joey's mansions inside of the city centre. Of those 15 children, 7 were dead from the drugs plague that had raged through Dublin in the inner city Dublin in the 1980s. And the amount of funerals of young people and mothers who had lost several children was just phenomenal. I didn't know how to manage the stress dealing with it. I was using Valium. I had no time to consult. I had reduced access to services. I did have one thing, because the professor who preceded Tom O'Dowd was Professor James McCormack, and he did teach me about the concept of justice in healthcare provision. And he did countlessly repeat the inverse care law from Julian Tudor Hart. So I had learned the concept of justice, and that helped me so much in my work in general practice. So I believe we have no excuse not to be providing education on how to work in areas of deprivation. And the reason we have no excuse is we know so much. We know that in areas of deprivation, people have shorter lifespans, and they spent more of those less years with chronic illness or multimorbidity. We know that while there is a slope of inequality in areas of deprivation and health inequalities that rises and rises, that when it comes to the health of marginalised, such as homeless or travellers, we hit a cliff edge and those statistics rocket up. We know that there's an inequity of GP workload in areas of deprivation and with marginalised groups. Earlier on, we talked about not separating between GPs and keeping together, because GPs who are in affluent areas work hard, as we do. They do work hard. However, that argument that they are equal in their workload strikes me. I worked in disability politics, and every now and then you hear the argument, sure, aren't we all disabled? We are not all disabled, and we do not face the same problems. And I fought for disability rights against my able-bodied colleagues because they didn't support my rights as a disabled person. And if I don't find that my fellow colleagues in general practice don't support a GP contract that reflects the fact that there needs to be more funding for the services in areas of deprivation for the patients there, I will fight with my GP colleagues. We know there's an extra burden of advocacy for GPs working in areas of deprivation and with marginalised groups, and we know that GPs were never trained to work with advocacy. We know that there's an inequitable distribution of GPs. There are less GP applicants for GP posts in areas of deprivation, and there are lower quality GPs. And this is because those GP applicants know it is harder work in those areas. We know that having a GP training scheme in an area improves local recruitment. We know that a curricular focus on deprivation improves recruitment and retention. This has been demonstrated in undergraduate programs in the US, where they have a focus on deprivation, and they found that their people who graduate from those undergraduate programs are more likely to end up working in areas of deprivation. We know that there are certain skills for working in areas of deprivation and with marginalised, and that those skills can be taught. And as David Blaine has termed it, in training inverse care law, we know that areas of deprivation have less trained GP trainees and GP training schemes than affluent areas. This is North and South Dublin. Dublin is separated by the River Liffey, and it is a relatively affluent south, and it is a relatively deprived north, with large areas of blanket deprivation in North Dublin. This is caught in popular culture. There's books written about the comedy about North and South Dublin. There are jokes. What do you call a North Sider in a suit? The accused. What do you say to a North Sider in a suit? 2 Big Macs and a packet of chips, please. And in this area of deprivation, it is actually reflected in the mortality and morbidity indices. Mortality is 50% higher in North Dublin than the rest of the Eastern region, and morbidity rates are higher. We have 1 to 16 GPs per head of population in the affluent south of Dublin, 1 to 2.5 in the non-affluent north of Dublin. This is, back in the 2000s. 23% of GP lists were closed due to being too busy in the south side. 37%, not surprisingly, were closed in the north side. We had 3 GP training schemes in the south side and 0 GP training schemes in the north side. So we reflected the international experience of the inverse care law. So this was the actual basis for how I proposed the idea of the North Dublin City GP training scheme. And myself and Dr. Ming Rawat founded it in 2009. And I now am co-director along with Dr. Cathy Cullen, who's here in the audience with us today. I personally believe everyone should have a strong vision and mission, because for me, it's what inspires me. Inspiration means to breathe life into. A vision is the way you want to see the world, and our GP training scheme vision is that every person in community has access to a professional quality and holistic general practitioner service that will allow them to maximise their health irrespective of background and economic status. The mission is what we are going to do to actually help achieve that vision. It may be only a small part of the vision, but it's part of it. And our mission in the North Dublin GP training scheme is to form professional and very high quality general practitioners whose passion is to maximise patient and community health in a holistic manner, and whose own health is maximised through the ability to self-care. Our vision and mission drive everything. Every year we revisit it again. Dr. Cathy Cullen leads the revisit to our mission and vision and mission. And each year we take a particular aspect of it. which we concentrate on. 2 years ago it was access, last year it was quality, this year it is holism. Our curriculum is driven by the vision and mission, and first and most important part of our curriculum is to devise high-quality GPs who practice evidence-based medicine, because the main thing we want to do is to get high-quality GPs providing good clinical care in areas of deprivation. However, when we teach them about that medicine, we bring in social aspects. So if we're teaching diabetes and we talk about the homeless patient, how do you manage diabetes if you have to store your insulin in a fridge and you're in a hostel where you don't have access to a fridge? How do you manage diabetes when you're living on a hostile food diet or on the streets living off soup kitchens? However, we also run a number of other modules which are specific to our programme. First of all, we run a social medicine module, which covers a number of areas such as stigma and discrimination, health inequities, health of marginalised groups, consulting behaviour. Fiona Riley runs primary health care in the community, which is different to primary care in the community. We look at the treatment of drug misuse, the time-efficient consultation, among a number of range of different issues we address in that particular programme. As Dr. Kathy Cullen says, is we also need to teach the GP trainees to put their own oxygen masks on first, because you have to learn to survive in areas of deprivation, or else we'll end up with the burnout. I heard Petra early on, I was talking to her, and I felt a sense of diminishing hope. And I heard it in your presentation, Petra, too. I think it's a sad, because I've heard you speak and you've given me such hope. And I think the danger for us working in these areas is hopelessness is such a feature of poverty that we can succumb to it. And I think it is really important, and I know it is an issue you've talked about, the importance of self-care. On our programme, Kathy and Ming teach self-care, including an MBSR, mind-based, fullness-based stress reduction course, yoga, as well as other methods of self-care. We run a change management module. Why? We want our trainees to change the world. We run an arts programme. Why? Have you ever sat around in a clinical meeting and discussed a very, very terrible, sad case, and everyone at the meeting is fine at the end of it? And that evening you might go to a fictitious film and find yourself in tears at the end. We are learned as doctors to defend ourselves, probably appropriately, but for an educator it is so good to work with a group of trainees with tears in their eyes, having watched I, Daniel Blake, and help them develop empathy and support for their patients who are on social welfare. We establish our hospital posts as much as possible in areas of deprivation in our GP practices. It's great to have Mel, our GP trainer, over here, and I'm Trish, our 2 GP trainers, in areas of deprivation as well. In their 4th year, and this is one of I think one of the most powerful parts of our programme, we run these special interest posts. And these are posts where I work towards developing skills for working with marginalised groups. Dr. Fiona Riley has developed this, and basically for 1 day a week for 4 months, our trainees work in a homeless clinic providing GP services. For 1 day a week for 4 months, they work in drug clinics, and for 1 day a week for 4 months, they work in prison service in the morning and migrant services in the afternoon. Dr. Bridget Kiley helps to develop this programme as well, who's here today as well, and has done great work developing that. That's a video we can show some other time. One of the things I'm proudest of is something I had nothing to do with, is our trainees developed a vision and mission committee because they wanted to make the vision and mission real for themselves. And they decided to do it through action, not through words. So in their 1st year, they decided they would, we had an international street medicine conference come to Dublin, so they decided they were to run the first Irish street medicine conference. And that has been running every year and has over 100 attendees since their first conference 4 or 5 years ago. The following year, they decided they were going to set up GP clinics in homeless service, and they set up several GP clinics in homeless services. I forgot to say in our GP training programs, we have had some innovative programs in those special medicine placements. Just wanted to mention 2. He's developed a new program for undocumented migrants who have no access to healthcare, which is run by a GP trainee supported by Dr. Kathy Cullen. We also run a hepatitis C program where Dr. Ari MacDonald, who's a trainee in our practices, has worked on. And that was where I referred 40 patients for hepatitis C treatment, curative treatment. 23 missed their first appointment, I think 14 missed their second appointment, and 2 completed treatment. So Irene ran a clinic along with other GP trainees where the actual Hep C hospital clinic is run in my practice, in the homeless practice that I run in what's called the Granby Centre. And we have now 31 patients treated and around 7 or 8 on treatment at the moment, and it's running very successfully. So our Vision and Mission Committee has been, as I said, it was inspired, and that shows to me that actually the actual trainees were buying into the vision and mission. Kathy Cullen runs post-scheme mentoring and CME work as well. Our outcomes. First and foremost, we have had the highest amount of applications in the country annually per actual GP training place since we started. And we exceed our nearest competitor by a long way. And I'm not saying this to be just I am proud of it. But I say it because it actually shows to me, I had become cynical about young people. And I think this showed me young people do want to make a difference. It's just we need to show them how. And it isn't just the GP. We didn't just get all the ones who wanted to change. I learned this because my present GP, Sean Owens, who's here today, he came from a different scheme, and he has taken to this work in areas of deprivation like a duck to water. And if we want deep end GPs to be in the deep end, ducks is what we should be doing. In our first second year, we were asked to write the ICGP social medicine and module, as well as the module for migrant healthcare. And now all GP trainees in Ireland have access to social medicine thing. And also we wrote the ICGP migrant healthcare. When you bring something into we also sent last year we sent a survey to the graduates from the programme, and we had 32 graduates and basically 28 responded. 95% were working either in a deprived or marginalised community, 59% were working with blanket deprivation. 100% wished to work in areas of deprivation, 54% worked in clinics for marginalised, and 11% worked for full-time in clinics for marginalised, such as homeless, drug addiction, etc. We did a qualitative review, and this is some of the themes. There was a commitment to working in areas of deprivation. I could go on forever with a variety of examples of how my career trajectory has been enhanced by my experience on the programme. I, along with many of my colleagues, would be much less likely to pursue a career in areas of deprivation. I cannot myself do anything other else. Our trainees talked a lot about decreased fear. I think among GPs in general there can be a sense of caution or fear towards these groups that stems from lack of exposure. In contrast, my colleagues from the NDCGP and I are completely at ease, and there's a sense of increased skills and knowledge. I feel more comfortable working in resource-limited situations with deprived groups of people where the burden of disease is much higher than the average population than I believe I would have been if I'd chosen a different GP training scheme. When you introduce something into a system, you don't know where way it's going to change. Dave Blaine has said the NDCGP has influenced the development of the Glasgow Pioneer Scheme. Our wonderful colleagues over in Manchester, I love them, have just launched a GP training scheme based on our scheme. It's only started 2 weeks ago, and I just think it's fantastic. And Northern Ireland, we had a conference last month where we're seeking to develop GP training in areas of deprivation based on the NDCGP model as well, or possibly the Pioneer model, but it's actually moving towards developing that training system. One of the things that I noticed when we are actually doing this is that our GP trainees were joining practice in areas of deprivation, but they weren't starting new practice in areas of deprivation. West Finglas is an area in Dublin that has a population of 27,000, same size as a town called Mullingar in the centre of Dublin. Mullingar has 15 GPs, West Finglas, an area of blanket deprivation, has 0 GPs. So I and Frank Minnelli came up with an idea of a social enterprise where we would actually set up a social enterprise, which we have set up called Curram HealthNet, and we would obtain philanthropic funding that would allow us to develop a practice in an area of deprivation, and that we would then, once it became self-funding, obviously we'd go and develop other practices. We launched our pilot 2 years ago with one of our graduates and another GP trainee who just arrived from Cork, and I'm delighted to say it is now self-funding. It actually reached profitability just late last year, and we're looking toward developing practices in 4 other areas over the next 2 to 3 years in other areas of deprivation. I also think it's important to realise that our scheme didn't develop just in isolation. There's a number of projects going on in Dublin, and they all interconnect. Safety Net Ireland provides GP care to marginalised, including homeless, and I think Patrick's involved in that as well. And we have it's all over Ireland, and it provides many clinics to over 5,000 patients from marginalised groups. North Dublin's GP training scheme has many posts that we share. We provide many trainees to work on Safety Net programme, and we work very closely with Inclusion Health, which is run by the amazing Athena Lee Kelly, where she's an inclusion health specialist, the first in the world, and she actually has a team that helps meet marginalised groups such as homeless or drug addiction as they arrive in casualty and provide care that means they feel welcome and they will stay. And as a result, we found that the health outcomes have improved and the amount of hospital bed days they stay in hospital has actually decreased because they're healthier. Curram HealthNet, I've told you about, a partnership for health equity. The interesting thing is there's the huge crossover between these. I founded SafetyNet. Dr. Catherine Cullen, who works as my co-program director, works as a doctor in SafetyNet. Fiona Riley, who developed our social medicine placements, is the general manager for SafetyNet. Curran HealthNet was founded by people myself, who works with the GP training scheme. Clean Cali, who founded Inclusion Health, applied for our GP training scheme around 6 years ago. And she got a place. And 2 months before she was started, she came to us and she said, listen, I really love hospital medicine. I want to do what you're doing on this scheme and in SafetyNet in hospital. So you don't know when you introduce something new into a scheme what's actually going to happen. Obviously, when you do something, there's many people who are involved in the development of it. And I'm going to finish off by, you said we had an arts programme, and next month we're having our spoken word poetry and short story evening, which the trainees have organised, and ye are lucky enough to be the first to hear my contribution to that particular event. I remember the first time ever I saw your face, white and pale and full of grace, scored with a filigree of blue-veined lace, to bring blood, to bring blood, to bring blood. Blood too often carry an opiate haze, had clotted and blocked your circulatory maze. And you beseeched me for help and held tight my gaze. As you pled, you gasped, and you sucked. So we lifted you high to where air fresh and clean, and scoured out your vessels with methadone green. And as you floated up high where angels do dream, you shone, and you shone, and you shone. Hep B, Hep C, SBE, DVT, how one's body can cope when you're given some care and a sliver of hope. And fun flies in and lovers elope, and you grew, and you grew, and you grew. And when your baby was born, you shone from the core. A Madonna and child for us to adore. It was your miracle, you had evened the score. All seemed good, all seemed good, all seemed right. One slip, 2 slips, was all that it took. The child stealers stole in, and your golden world shook. And though I knew that they came, with shame I could not look. And you shriveled, you shrank, and you crumpled. The last time ever I saw your face, blue bruised with a lover's fisted embrace, your heroine's cheek a hollowed out space, the sun dead in your eyes, in your eyes, in your eyes. Thank you.